However, destructive leaders can't work on their own. They need followers in order to spread their influence throughout the organization. So in order for them to have power, they have to have people that are going along with their vision. We can categorize the followers into two different types. There are conformers who have unmet needs, low core self-evaluation, and generally tend to have low maturity. These are people that'll just sort of follow along with the crowd. There's also colluders who are much more actively engaged in the destructive leader's vision. They tend to have higher ambition and similar worldviews with the leaders, and generally they have bad values. So let's talk a little bit more about these two categories. Think for a minute about your own experience in the workplace. Why do you think someone would want to follow an unethical or destructive leader? What do you think is in it for them, or how do you think they got into that position? Now, as I said before, we can think of destructive leaders' followers as falling into the two categories of conformers and colluders. Here I've represented them as sheep and the sheepdog, but generally, people who either go along with the leader or who are actively engaged in the leader's vision. All right, let's start first by talking about those conformers. Creepy. One of the follower characteristics of conformers is that they tend to have unmet basic needs. So we know that poor people who are living in fear tend to be easier to control. It's actually, unfortunately, one of the classic pieces of history we see that dictators tend to rise up in times of uncertainty and turmoil within governments. We also know that isolation and loneliness can be manipulated by offering a community. When I did research in counterterrorism, that was actually one of the main ways that terrorist organizations attracted people. It wasn't always necessarily because of the ideology, but instead it was just this feeling of acceptance that you have a group where you can belong, and it may even give a person meaning to follow the vision of a very charismatic leader who they look up to. Other follower characteristics of conformers is a negative core self-evaluation. So if you have low self-esteem or low self-efficacy, you don't really trust your own decisions. And so that makes you easier to influence. You may not stand up for yourself and your own needs, and you may not stand up for other people. It does take a fair amount of self-confidence and knowing what's right for you and what's right for other people in order to be able to stand up to someone that's bullying you or that's bullying others. Conformers also tend to have lower maturity than the general population. So they have a really high respect for rules. In other words, they don't tend to think for themselves. They go along with what they're told to do. And that can sometimes create a mob mentality. So if you're at a sports game and you see everybody get really excited and start pushing each other around, they may be people who would get caught up in something like that and end up doing that even though they didn't mean to. So let's go on now to colluders. Remember, colluders are people who really buy into the leader's vision, and they almost want to be next in line for that position with the leader. They want to be right there in that position of power with the leader, and they want to take advantage of the influence that the leader has. So follower characteristics of colluders, one of the main ones is ambition. So as some of the quotes that I had read earlier showed, it's often just a way for people to get to the top, to follow someone who looks like they're winning. So they might be just willing to follow any policies if it's going to advance their own agenda or their own status. And often, because destructive leaders are so charismatic and so confident, they may seem to be the person who really has their lives under control and really knows where they're going. And so if you're someone who's highly ambitious, you might cling on to that as a way for you to ride their coattails and get to the top as well. Colluders also tend to have congruent values and beliefs with the leader. So there's this link between similarity and attraction. We tend to be attracted to those that we are similar to. When you see someone that thinks the same way that you do, then you feel like justified for thinking that way. And so you want to spend more time with that person because it makes you feel good about yourself. We also know that transformation leadership results in goal alignment. So when that charismatic leader creates a transformational relationship with a specific colluder follower, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It continues to make them more and more aligned and more similar to each other. And that creates a self-perpetuating cycle. Colluders also tend to have unsocialized values. They kind of want to engage in destructive acts anyway. They might feel like they're rebellious. They might feel a lot of anger and don't really have a place to channel that anger. And so here comes this charismatic, destructive leader who is giving them something to do with that anger and making it feel like it's productive and that it's validated.